My name is Kevin Appleby. I'm the Senior Policy Director at Center for Migration Studies. For those of you who don't know me, I hope you had a good lunch. Our next panel is entitled Playing to Win Over the Short and Long Term. It'll focus on successful collaborations for defeating anti-immigrant legislation in the past and how those battles may influence future victories over the long term. And as Vince Lombardi once said, winning is not everything, it's the only thing. So we should follow that mantra. Anyway, so the point is to learn about advocacy policy strategies that are able to fight back anti-immigrant legislation, because I'm sure we're going to see more of it coming down the pike on both the federal and state level, and how those strategies can be forged into strategies to win positive legislation over the long term. So as we've all learned over the last day or two, we're in a dark period where we're really going to be playing a lot of defense, I think. But in that period, we'll probably see advantages, glimmers of hope, some weaknesses in the people that we're fighting against, and from that, maybe forge a coalition or new coalitions that might lead to victory in the future. And I think that's what the focus of our panel is. What are the strategies and tactics that have been effective in the past, and what lessons have we learned in the past in some of these battles on both the federal and state level? So that's really the focus of the panel. And we have some great experts to give their expertise on these issues. And I will introduce them in the order in which they will speak. We'll not have really a roundtable question and answer thing. We'll just do the traditional, let everyone talk, and then open it up for questions. So our first speaker will be Ashley Feasley, who is the Director of Migration Policy at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, all the way from Washington, formerly the Advocacy Director at Clinic as well. So she is well-versed in the battles of Washington and in national legislation. So she's going to give us a sense of what's going on in D.C. Secondly, we have Ghislaine Williams, who is the grassroots community organizer for Refugee Council USA. Refugee Council USA is a coalition of organizations that provide refugee protection both overseas and in resettlement here in the United States. So Ghislaine's going to talk about strategies on the local level to promote refugee protection. Third, we'll have Chris Newman, who is the legal director and general counsel for the National Day Labor Organization based in Los Angeles, and he'll talk a little bit about legislation around the country, positive and negative, and what lessons we can learn in those battles. And finally, last but not least, Frances Valdez, who is the Texas director of United We Dream, and with her, Oscar Hernandez, who is a Houston organizer for United We Dream. And they're going to focus mainly on SB 4 and the battle against that law. So a wide array of expertise, and I'll let Ashley begin.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you to CMS and partners for this wonderful opportunity here in Houston. Very much appreciate it. I have a PowerPoint. I find it helpful, so I'm going to start with that. I wanted to give just a minute of overview about what Migration and Refugee Services within the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is. It's the department that the bishops have that does programming and policy relating to migration in the United States. The service component for MRS is really quite large. They serve unaccompanied children, refugees, and human trafficking victims. MRS is the largest refugee resettlement agency, and we work in partnership with RCUSA and other resettlement agencies. But the influence of the bishops here in terms of their programmatic contributions is pretty big. We also do migration policy and advocacy initiatives on behalf of the bishops in the United States as it relates on the federal level to working with the administration and then also working with Congress. A lot of our policy goals are derived from Catholic social teaching principles and other documents that are there. I know some of you were in the faith-based panel and we talked about the rich Catholic religious history relating to migration, and that's where we draw from a lot of our work. In our work with the federal government administratively, we work with the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State. These are all the different departments that interact on migration-related programs, and they all have very discrete pieces of how we care, recognize, and in some places enforce policies against immigrants and migrants. Lastly, I wanted to just touch on our Justice for Immigrants Coalition, which is the Bishop's public education and outreach campaign that is basically a national coalition of Catholic organizations that covers 170 dioceses. And we have over 675 points of individual contact and a database of about over 80,000. So turning to, Kevin's asked me to give a little bit of the current state of migration policy in the US on the federal level. And I'm gonna quickly go over 3 elements with a focus particularly on the 2, executive and legislative, because we have some community organizing experts here in the room and on the panel. The executive session, what's going on with the new administration is undoubtedly focused on what the migration-related executive orders are. I'm going to discuss them in a little bit more detail, but that's kind of where we all are in terms of what we're dealing with as it relates to the administration. On the legislative front, I'm going to highlight that we have some looming funding issues, and also that we're going to see some fights relating to unaccompanied kids, border security, and sanctuary cities. And then I don't think that we can have a presentation like this when me being from DC and talking about the federal level where I don't acknowledge the amazing amount of fear in immigrant communities and the effects of raids and enforcement operations on communities. So that's a little overview of what we're going to talk about. As it relates to the executive level, we have 3 migration-related executive orders. One was the one on border security. This was introduced January 25th. It was introduced with the executive order on interior enforcement as well. Now, many of you in the media heard so much about the travel ban and heard about the refugee resettlement piece, which was the bill that which was the order that was introduced 2 days later, January 27th. But these bills, these orders, the executive order on border security and the executive order on interior enforcement, really radicalized how our immigration landscape is for the moment. They dramatically changed the priorities of the US government as it relates to the Department of Homeland Security. In relation to issues on border security, it calls for the building of another wall relating to the US and Mexico border. It calls for a big increase of boots on the ground of Border Patrol as well as ICE officers, and then a massive increase of immigrant detention, the likes of which we've never seen before. The interior enforcement order, when there was mention in the media about this, it was basically focused on the sanctuary cities piece, which is very important. That's section 6 of the order. But I think the most important piece, and something that we as advocates really have to drive home to individuals, is that this executive order dramatically expanded who was a priority for deportation in this country in a way that we had not seen during the last couple of years of the Obama administration. And so very much set in motion some of what we're seeing in communities today. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the executive order on resettlement. There's actually 2. There was one issued on the 27th of January that, as you know, was stopped by litigation, and then the administration introduced another one on March 6th. We are currently in a holding pattern as it relates to the executive order on refugee resettlement. We're waiting to hear about parts of it that are up in litigation at the 4th Circuit, which has issued its opinion and now is facing actual movement in the Supreme Court. And then we're also waiting to hear about the 9th Circuit, which is the litigation that has to deal with the travel ban and also the pause on refugee resettlement. I want to say just for a second, much has been discussed about the executive order on refugee resettlement, and there's a lot to talk about in terms of security and what it means in terms of the litigation. But representing a refugee resettlement organization and seeing the impact on families in terms of people who have been waiting for many years in situations of dire persecution, not being able to know whether they can come, has really been a difficult element, I think, for all the refugee resettlement agencies in the country. And it continues to be, as we don't know with certainty what's going to happen. So, turning to, I talked a little bit about our response, but I want to just highlight what the bishops have done in response to these orders. From the period of January 25th until recently, 10 statements have been issued by the Committee on Migration or the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and 48 individual bishops have issued statements about the executive orders. Now, these statements range from outright condemnation of the executive orders to statements of religious tolerance and religious liberty. We have had 2 very successful postcard campaigns from our JFI campaign, one that had over 65,000 individuals who signed on in opposition of the executive order. And of course, we are working to try and engage the administration as much as possible, particularly in the areas of enforcement and refugee resettlement. So I turn now to legislative. This is where I think we're going to see a lot of action here for the rest of the, probably till September. Until recently, the Congress was taking clues and kind of leadership from the executive. You had lawmakers who were maybe not willing to come right out on positive or negative immigration and migration-related bills, and were looking to take leadership from the administration. But we are seeing signs of resurgence, particularly in the House. The House Judiciary Committee has started to show that it's going to be taking leadership on introducing very bad immigration enforcement bills that target immigrants writ large, the undocumented, unaccompanied children, and refugees as well. We've seen a couple markups of this last 2 weeks, and then we're going to see another markup of bills coming next week relating to bills coming out of the House Judiciary that will relate to enforcement. The future issues that we're going to see is funding for the fiscal year of 2018. Very simply put, the request that the President has made relating to immigration enforcement is vast. It's a $1.6 billion request to build a wall on U.S.-Mexico and an over $700 million increase for immigrant detention, asking for a population of upwards of 50,000 immigrants being detained per day. Nowhere, I think, is more vital today in terms of Washington, D.C. and strategy than looking to fight the funding here. Because if there's no funding to do this, it's not going to be as easy for the administration to do it. So this will be a looming fight, I think, that we will see. Other enforcement efforts I've mentioned briefly, kind of discussing what we need to do in terms of fighting against enforcement efforts in the House and in the Senate. So highlighting very quickly the response, the bishops issued a letter on H.R. 2431, which was a very enforcement-only bill that was marked up 2 weeks ago. And as I mentioned, there's upcoming bills next week that we will be opposing as well. We continue to protect unaccompanied children and the protections that are threatened to be rolled back, and that's in certain trafficking bills and also in child-focused bills. And so just pivoting last, I want to talk a little bit about the community fear and apprehension and what exactly is really important, I think, for us at the Bishops' Conference and in Washington, D.C. to address. The bishops have been seeing daily remarks about individuals in their parishes afraid to go to school, afraid to go to church. And I think the impact has been a collective impact of, well, what can we do and how can we engage? And much like you, who are experts in the community, one of the things that we have looked to do is to do education initiatives. So things to show communities, this is how you can protect yourself, or these are things you need to consider as you're evaluating whether to become a sanctuary or welcoming jurisdiction. To this end, we have done several education and self-help videos. They are on the Justice for Immigrants website. It's justiceforimmigrants.org. Now, many of you have conducted Know Your Rights trainings or have participated in them. So these videos are not a very big deal to you. You live in the Houston area or other metropolitan areas. But imagine less underserved communities where the Catholic Church maybe is the point of entry, and having a USCCB branded approved video like this and engagement and support from your bishop to talk about the need to prepare your family for enforcement, or to talk about the need to try and find an attorney or speak with your consulate. We've seen really positive outreach from this, and I think that it'll continue our efforts to do education, along with many of you in the room, very much important. I do want to speak for a minute about accompaniment. Many of you are aware that there are ICE check-ins occurring where individuals who in the past, perhaps under the Obama priority enforcement program, were not priorities, and they would check in accordingly to their ICE field office. That has become a source of tension, as you know. And so we have been encouraging bishops and other church leaders and community leaders to accompany individuals when they go to these types of check-ins. And we have current efforts that have been successful. I think many of you maybe have seen, in particular, Cardinal Tobin of Newark, who has made some really important statements and had done some great work with PICO organizers to help Catalina Guerrero in his effort. Lastly, I would say that it's really important, the element of solidarity. We're in a very uncertain moment, and to recognize that uncertainty and offer not only personal education and things that can help day-to-day lives, but also help in spiritual accompaniment is really vital. And so to that, we've really worked to do more prayers, outreach, solidarity groups, and also are engaging in a campaign with the Vatican on migration. So we've talked a little bit about what's next relating to the fighting over funding, which is going to be so key, the pending litigation that's going on. I haven't really mentioned this, but there is a looming battle over TPS that we're going to see as it relates to the fall, affecting those who have TPS from El Salvador, Honduras, and then Haiti. And then also the issue of addressing separation due to family. These are things I think that we'll see coming up in the future. But in closing, I just wanted to give kind of 3 responses on how to basically prepare. One is this issue of funding. I mentioned this, and it's really important. Any effort that you can connect with DC-based groups to talk about funding, please engage with your local lawmakers. Tell them that you do not want the $1.6 billion for the wall. Tell them that you do not want the $700 million for immigrant detention, and tell them that this is an issue of importance to you. Do it every chance you have during the summer. The July 4th recess is a really important time. The strategy here is key. If there's not money to put forth this type of enforcement, then less enforcement of what is envisioned will incur. It's really that simple where we're at. The next and piece of advice I would say is to connect the dots and show the damage. Our communities are very much hurt by these actions, but some of the people who are in power and making decisions, they aren't able to see those losses. They're not able to personalize and internalize what that looks like. And so you being in the community and able to engage that, I think is really important, and making those cases visible is going to be vital. The last 2, I think, kind of go together. So in the fight for assisting immigrants and refugees, we're diverse and unique. Cardinal DiNardo got up and talked this morning about some of the differences. There was a great question about how to engage conservative audiences, and even within the church itself, how do we do that? Part of it is looking at our commonalities and trying to accept the different roles that different organizations and different people feel and have, but in realizing the larger struggle, which is to protect and support and recognize the human dignity of all immigrants and refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Ghislaine.
All right, thank you, Kevin, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this panel. My name is Ghislaine Williams, and I work with Refugee Council USA, which is a national coalition of all of the major organizations, national organizations that do refugee resettlement in the country, and as well as some human rights organizations. And my position is based here in Texas, and I'll be mostly talking about Texas, but I did want to start off with just providing some context and saying that historically, the refugee resettlement program has had bipartisan support. We've actually had more refugees resettled under Republican administrations than Democratic ones. And so we've been pretty much under the radar for a long time, but everything changed really dramatically at the end of 2015 after the attacks in Paris. And that's when we started to see the really strong show of anti-refugee efforts from all across the country, locally, statewide, and nationally. And unfortunately, our Texas leaders were paving the way on that. We saw Governor Abbott try unsuccessfully to stop Syrian refugees from being resettled in Texas. And we knew that there were going to be more anti-refugee struggles ahead in Texas. And that's why about a year ago, our CUSA created my position, which was to focus on Texas because we knew that there were going to be more efforts, like I said. Also because Texas is one of the most important regions for refugee resettlement. Here in Houston, it's actually the largest resettlement city in the country. We've had the program in Texas for over 40 years. And one of the great things about that is that even though our state leaders have been very anti-refugee, on the grassroots level, the refugee program has a ton of support. So, you know, we have thousands of volunteers from all sorts of political backgrounds. We have, you know, hundreds of faith partnerships, hundreds of business partnerships. And so knowing that, we knew that there was a really great opportunity in Texas to mobilize the community to advocate for refugees and make sure that Texas continued to be a welcoming place for refugees. So about a year ago, I started here in Texas, and it was a little bit challenging at first because, like I said, historically, the program has had support, and so that means that historically there hasn't been a lot of activism around refugees because the community hasn't had to defend itself. And so we were starting a little bit from scratch, and I worked really early on with the refugee resettlement agencies, refugee serving organizations, different partners like the community volunteers, the faith community, the business partners, to do trainings on basically like catching people up to the political environment that we were facing, as well as stressing the need for people to speak up at this point. And you know, the people who are doing direct service for refugees, we really needed them to step up and also do the political advocacy. And so we did trainings to teach people on different advocacy techniques and things like that. And we were able to form advocacy teams in each of the major resettlement cities in Texas that were going to be willing to take part in take action alerts and rapid response and engaging our elected officials. And so a big chunk of last year was spent on preparing for our Texas legislative session, which started in January. And we expected to see a lot of really terrible bills, which did happen. And so last year we were preparing for that and wanted to start engaging elected officials, so state representatives. So we sent people from our advocacy networks to meet with state representatives to educate them about the refugee community, and also just to start building relationships. And so the groups that we sent out, we tried to make those as diverse as possible to showcase the broad support that we have for refugees. So each group had staff from resettlement agencies, partner organizations. We had former refugees go, people from the faith community, people from the business community, and in a lot of our meetings we had veterans, some of whom were involved with Veterans for American Ideals, which is a national organization of veterans who support refugees. And there's a few people in the room here that participated in those meetings as well. And they were very successful. We found out that representatives didn't know anything at all about refugees. And there was a ton of misconceptions, just total lack of knowledge. A lot of the people who we met with, so these are state representatives again, basically just thought that the same thing that was going on in Europe, the videos that they were seeing was what was happening here in the US. So they thought people were coming in by boat, they thought people were crossing the border, they didn't know where people were coming from. A lot of representatives from, these are, representatives from major cities in Texas didn't even know that there were refugees in their cities. So it was a really interesting practice, but we were very glad that we did it because we were able to, basically do these Refugee 101 discussions with a lot of representatives. We figured out who our allies were, and then we figured out what the main points of opposition were. And so we, started developing talking points and documents to try to address some of those things. Once the legislative session did start, we did see, as we expected, anti-refugee bills. I won't talk about all of them, but just to name a couple, there was a bill to completely abolish the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs here in Texas. There's another really terrible bill that would have made it harder for refugees and asylees to get driver's licenses, and it would have made the appearance of their driver's license different than other people. And then we had some crazy bills that basically captured everything terrible that you could do to refugees, like a surveillance program, tracking programs, assimilation programs, all of that into one nice packet. But that one was just so crazy that we weren't too worried about it, fortunately. We did have, so once the session started, we had these groups of people, our activists, local activists, meet both in district and at the state capitol to keep talking to representatives. And in these meetings, they were addressing the anti-refugee bills and also addressing the fact that refugees, contribute so much to our Texas communities. That was kind of one of our main talking points, is talking about the different ways that they contributed. And then also talking about it in terms of values and, Texas values of helping our neighbors and things like that. And we did have people meet with the authors of the anti-refugee bills, especially the driver's license bill. We had several groups go and share their concerns. We had refugees talk about how their community would be impacted. And the good news on that is that we actually did have the author respond to several of those concerns, and they changed the bill and took out a lot of the really terrible stuff on the bill. They did still have a terrible bill in the end that we didn't support, but we did appreciate the fact that they addressed some of our concerns. And we did a couple other things during the session. We did a legislative briefing. We had a huge advocacy day where we had people from our advocacy networks from across the state gather in Austin, which was a really great experience because we also had a lot of former refugees who participated and did office visits. And I'd say one of the great things about that day was, like I mentioned earlier, the activism is really new to the resettlement committee or community. And so it was really great for people to come together and kind of, share stories about what they had done in their local communities and start building that culture of activism. And so that was a very successful event, and we are happy that we had so many people turn out. And the good news overall is that we didn't see any anti-refugee bills pass the Texas legislature, which was not something that we thought we would say. And so we were really happy that we were able to do that. And we know that it was because there was so much effort from a ton of people constantly calling their representatives and constantly hassling the staffers. And moving forward, just to talk about that, so just like every other immigrant community in Texas, refugees are really concerned about SB4 and what that's going to mean for the refugee community, because the state representatives had no idea what refugee status meant, and so we don't expect law enforcement to know that either. And so even though they do have legal status, they're definitely worried about the discrimination, wrongful detention, whatever may come from SB4. And as Ashley was mentioning, we definitely know that there's going to be some national challenges ahead with further efforts to reduce the refugee population in the country, There's a lot of people here in Texas, refugees, former refugees who have been here for a long time and have been waiting for family members to come. And because of all of the uncertainty right now, a lot of them who are now citizens, longtime Texas residents, don't know if they'll be reunited with their families. And so our focus moving forward will be, to help out with some of the SB4 preparations and challenges, and then the national challenges ahead.
Okay, Chris?
Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Newman. I'm the legal director for the National Day Labor Organizing Network based in Los Angeles, which is a network of 49 organizations of day laborers around the country. I'm going to talk a little bit about some exciting stuff that's happening in California. I'm going to talk about some lessons from Arizona, and then hopefully tee things up to talk about how we can help turn the tide here in Texas. But I wanted to start by a little bit explaining our view, at least, about how we got into this mess, the human rights crisis that is now the Trump administration. And obviously, I'm not going to, in 10 minutes, explain or try to explain the whole Trump effect. We're going to need a whole conference and like a team of French anthropologists to come to the United States to explain what the heck is going on, and I wouldn't purport to try to do that, but I do want to bring a little bit of the sort of antecedents, recent antecedents, because I think some of the mistakes that we've made have laid the foundation, unfortunately, for this environment that we're in, and in particular, the sort of all of our eggs in one basket with comprehensive immigration reform strategy, which I think led to, unfortunately, a bit of the mess that we're in, both politically and legally. For a long time, obviously, everyone knows that Democrats sought a sort of omnibus legislative approach as sort of a panacea to immigrant rights issues in the United States as part of what they thought was a win-win strategy, either that they got the policy in winning and the accomplishment, or they would get the politics by sort of winning in losing, if you will, and pegging the Republicans as anti-immigrant and conflating anti-immigrant with being anti-Latino. And obviously, unfortunately, after 15 years of this strategy, we got a sort of lose-lose. We got neither the policy and the politics sort of went off the rails. And again, I think careful, sort of calculated play at identity politics that was part of, I think, the political strategy for CIR, unfortunately, certainly contributed to the Trump effect. But again, that's a much longer conversation. But there are two real big impacts, I think, that impact on the discussion of SB4 in Texas right now. And the first is that in the process of pursuing legislative reform, we ceded a lot of administrative reform advocacy that we should have been doing all along, pressuring DHS on deportations, on interior enforcement policy, and we weren't doing that. The second thing that we did was we ceded, unfortunately, state and local policy promulgation as well. This notion of trying to have one uniform omnibus ceded, in a sense, if you will, the terrain and created a vacuum that was filled by white supremacists like Chris Kobach and a white nationalist movement, which sort of manifested itself in Arizona and elsewhere. And we're now in a position, unfortunately, where immigration is sort of a nationalized fight, if you will, but there's no productive way in which we can advocate legislatively at the national level with a dysfunctional national government, and indeed, or dysfunctional legislative branch, but also now a dysfunctional executive branch. And so almost out of necessity, we will have to relocate our advocacy to the state and local level, but as well, the sort of social movement that was unleashed, again, by a variety of international forces that have given rise to sort of populism and this whole Trump effect. They're obviously engaging in a state and local strategy as well. Only, again, I think the difference for immigrants in our communities is that we have necessity that demands that we start to win real concrete policy victories at the local level. You can call them sanctuary cities, you can call them welcoming cities, but we need to win protective spaces so that people have breathing room to build power to turn the tide. And so we are living, unfortunately, in what a scholar in California, Karthik Ramakrishnan, calls the new immigration federalism, which is, again, an unfortunate legacy of the Obama administration. that we unfortunately live in this situation where there is a balkanized immigration policy in the United States, and depending on whatever county you go to or whatever state, there's going to be a different deportation policy. And of course, I mean, the National Day Labor Organizing Network, we were involved in trying to sort of uncover the truth about the sort of the bad idea that the Secure Communities policy, or in all of its different names and iterations, was in terms of imposing these types of dilemmas on local policymakers, imposing dilemmas on local police and sheriffs, and conflating mass incarceration and mass deportation policies, and again, creating this environment where you had, on the one hand, sort of the Arizonas of the world, and the other, the San Franciscos. But the National Day Labor Organizing Network, we've always worked with day laborers. Our theory of work has always involved promoting beacon policies wherever we can. There are 65 day labor centers in the United States, places where day laborers locally can sort of, some refer to them as labor sanctuaries. People who are presumed to be undocumented can get jobs and access to services. And then we'd fight in the places that were sort of the hot spots, the worst of the worst places, in particularly Arizona against Joe Arpaio. And I'm very, very grateful for the partnership with various different Catholic churches around the country that have worked to help to create day labor sanctuaries. But so we've been involved in sort of these two poles, if you will, of the local advocacy for a long time, rushing to the gunfire in certain places and trying to build local kind of bottom-up legalization policies for quite some time. And I do want to talk about lessons that we learned in Arizona, and first talk about California. But a point that I'll get to the point about how the relation between the sanctuary policies and the hotspot policies toward the end. California, I'll just say, we are promoting a bill right now called SB 54, which is the sort of anti-SB 4, if you will. It has been derisively by some referred to as sanctuary state legislation, but it's legislation that we endeavored to sort of pursue free from the encumbrances of combating the Obama administration's DHS, and now with all kinds of new political incentives where California lawmakers want to punch up and fight to Trump. A lot of the ideas that we had brought over the last 8 years were put back on the table, and Senate President Kevin De Leon put together what was the most sort of expansive, protective bill that we could think of that would try to basically kick ICE out of our local communities and ICE out of the criminal law enforcement system in California. And so the legislation that's moving toward the Senate right now would stop all honoring of ICE holds and transfer requests to DHS. It would completely eliminate ICE's access and CBP's access to jails. It would greatly limit, and prisons as well. It would prohibit 287G agreements throughout the state, and it would require a judicial warrant or a judicial determination of probable cause for any type of cooperation between local police and DHS. Like I said, the only reason why bills like this became possible, and the only reason why the sanctuary city policies that are now coming under attack from the Trump administration, but were themselves a repudiation and a revolt against the Obama administration deportation policy, the only reason why those sanctuary city policies are either there or possible, in my view, was because of the valiant fight that was put up in Arizona against first Sheriff Joe Arpaio and second against SB 1070. I've been for 15 years pushing for sanctuary policies. I can tell you the very first city that opted out of President Obama's Secure Communities policy, Washington, D.C., they were chanting no more Arizonas as that measure passed. The strongest language that we've ever had, the strongest argument to explain why police should not be involved in deportation. There's all kinds of arguments now, civil rights arguments, public safety arguments. I know Chief Acevedo talks about them, but the strongest sort of political argument that's been out there was we don't want to be like the state of Arizona, and we don't want our sheriff to be like Sheriff Joe Arpaio. And so it was, in essence, the unbelievably heroic work of advocates in Arizona and in Maricopa County in particular that I think created the space for the sanctuary policies in jurisdictions like San Francisco, Santa Clara, Cook County, and elsewhere. And so I'll sort of end by sharing some lessons, because it used to be that Arizona, we would say, was like the ghost of Christmas future, that it was sort of like the window into the near future of how awful the immigration debate was going. McCain was once a good guy in immigration. He became a bad guy. Janet Napolitano, the governor, then became the secretary of DHS. SB 1070, then you could always look to Arizona a little bit to see what's going to happen 2 years from now in the future. And that was always a bad thing. This time, actually, it's kind of a good thing, because there's a hopefulness, I think, in Arizona, a sense of having turned the tide. In the same election where Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, Joe Arpaio, who 10 years ago enjoyed an 86% approval rating in Maricopa County, 86% approval rating, he was voted out of office. And the leadership development that occurred in Arizona over the last 10 years in the process of beating back that tyrant is irreversible. And the people that were politicized in the process of turning the tide, it might not be next year or the year after, but that state will continue to turn a corner and move towards sort of California. And people talk about the Prop 187 sort of lesson. So I think when people are thinking about what's going to happen here in Texas, they want to approximate a little bit what happened in Arizona. A couple of different lessons, but first, a couple of reasons why I think things are different, and I think the challenges in Texas are a little bit greater, frankly, than they were in Arizona in 2010. And the first is that in 2010, Arizona's SB 1070 was perceived as like a little bit of like a cancerous tumor around the country, that if we could only sort of excise it or stop its spread, we didn't want Arizona to spread. And so there was a national sort of investment in preventing Arizona's policies from spreading around the country. Now there's a sense that we have, Trump already in the White House, that sort of cancer has already become malignant. And so I think that there's less attention, or there's less of a fear that what is happening with SB4 will spread, unfortunately. So there's less of an urgency nationally, which I think is a challenge. I think the second thing is that people are much more desensitized to suffering, and in particular, much more desensitized to the suffering of immigrants now than they were even 8 years ago. And so it's harder to shock the conscience about the mistreatment that's occurring. And there's obviously a lot more to be said about fractured media environments and all that kind of stuff. Other lessons to learn from Arizona are the following, and I was working almost full-time for many years, assisting in the pushback against SB 1070. The first is that the legal fight, the legal challenge against SB 1070 merely bought time for political power building and organizing. It's a finger in the dam, and anyone who expects that the lawyers are going to have some kind of Brown versus Board of Education moment in challenging SB4, you need to disavow yourself of that expectation immediately. If anything, the lawyers are going to sort of hold the line. Preemption law is sort of evolving in ways that could even overtake litigation. But I would like to caution people against sort of investing too much of their hope in a legal fight against SB4. The second lesson to be learned again from Arizona is that kind of full coordination among grassroots organizations in fighting back is totally impossible and also an unrealistic expectation. And I know that there's, on the one hand, an impulse to have everyone on the same page. On the other hand, there's an impulse to let 1,000 flowers bloom. And you kind of have to hold both things and have as much coordination as possible. But there's going to need to be a diversity, I'm sure, of tactics and strategies. And some people are going to have to do things that make certain people feel less comfortable. And the third thing that I'll say, again, that I think is the most important and perhaps is starting to develop, but what is really the most important in Texas right now, because I don't think that the stories of suffering and trauma on the community are going to be enough to turn the tide. The final thing is to say that there really needs to be an inspired fight. And United We Dream, I mean, it's great that they're going to end the panel because I think they have been leading what is the inspired fight. I mean, those are talking about the coming horrors, but then you look at what United We Dream is doing and you feel inspiration in terms of a beacon organization that is fighting back against Trump. And so I'll leave it. I'll leave it there. I mean, we at Endalon, we are going to help try to incubate a new organization. There's an organization called JOLT that's being run by Christina Sinsoon, the former director of the Workers' Defense Project in Austin, which is a sort of intersectional political power building organization that we're helping to be fiscal sponsors of. We're going to continue to do sort of local community organizing and base building based on the neighborhood defense models that we used in Arizona, of barrio defense committees, working with day laborers so that people can help themselves. And then we'll have a open source web platform where, again, disparate, BastaTexas.com or BastaTexas.org or something like that, where disparate different efforts within Texas of fighting back can sort of hang and promote their efforts. But you know, I think Texas really stands at the possibility of being, you know, I think frankly, whether you like it or not, Texas is the sort of new Arizona on the pole. When we used to think about San Francisco and Arizona, we're now thinking about sort of like San Francisco or whatever, California and Texas, which, you know, is obviously awful in the near term, but it leaves an incredible opportunity for sort of a way in which you all here can turn the tide in kind of new and inspiring ways. So I'll stop there.
Hello, my name is Frances. I'm just curious who's not from Houston. Raise your hand real fast. Oh, awesome. Well, welcome to the great state of Texas. And I actually really mean that. So I'm a native Texan, and I'm starting to talk about this a lot more, especially after the session. My family actually founded a little town called Fort Davis, Texas, in West Texas. If you ever go to Big Bend, you might drive through there. It's near Marfa. To remind everybody that people that look like me were here before this was Texas and have been here since the very beginning, which is why I'm very committed to the work that we do at United We Dream, because I know that my struggles and the struggles of people of color and poor people are aligned with those of the undocumented community. And I think that is the opportunity. You know, this session's called Playing to Win. And we're definitely in it to win it. And we were laughing because we're definitely the group that Chris is talking about that makes people uncomfortable. So I don't think we'll do that too much right now, but those are friends in the room that are here in Houston have probably felt that at different times. But I think that we're moving to a place where we understand the importance of the discomfort and different tactics. And so just to talk a little bit about the work, and then I'm gonna let Oscar close it off to give a personal perspective of what's happening. So we are part of the United We Dream Houston office. We also work throughout the state with 7 affiliates, and we were at the Texas legislature more than we would have liked. This session dealt with a lot of the blows and the ups and downs of the session. And really our work in Houston got stronger in 2013 when Oscar and Carolina, our 2 organizers, started our work and started building off of the DACA work and bringing in documented people or eligible documented people in to work with them and then organizing. And so our work really is grounded in the undocumented community, mostly young people fighting for themselves and their families. And I'm just here to help as much as I can. And really that work inspired and built into a group of folks coming together to figure out, okay, you know, we're doing deportation defense work, we are getting folks DACA, but we don't see a shift, right? We don't see the shift that we need. And knowing that we had to look at this at a systems level, and brought a group of folks together in 2015 to figure out what could we do, and looked at Houston and realized, again, that Houston was a deportation capital of the country, that we had the first and largest 287G program, and it was an issue that had been that people knew about in Houston. I'm not going to say we did not, definitely not start the fight against 287G, but we definitely went at it from a different approach and developed a disciplined, focused campaign to end 287G in Houston. And I want to acknowledge that we always knew that it was just the first step. We knew that 287G wasn't ending all collaboration with ICE, But we knew that we had to start somewhere because this was a county where sheriffs, even Democrat sheriffs, wouldn't even talk about the end of 287G, and people couldn't even conceive of that possibility. And I guess we many times thought we ourselves were crazy and didn't know if we were going to be able to succeed. Because the reality is that the politics of Texas, and as we're seeing, is a difficult thing to deal with. And I think that the nation has forgotten this in a sense, and I think it's like the thing that, like the cancer, right, that you don't go to the doctor for, and if you keep ignoring it, it's going to destroy you. And I feel like that's what's happening in Texas. You know, Texas stopped DAPA, and I don't think enough attention was paid to that, and Greg Abbott and how destructive he is. And I think that, and you cannot underestimate Greg Abbott and how brilliant he is. He really is brilliant, and he understands immigration enforcement better than most immigration practitioners, honestly. Because the reality is that a lot of immigration practitioners have not wanted to deal with enforcement, because there's been a lot of, especially here in Texas, this attitude of, well, why do we have to worry about the people that are in jail? Those are the bad criminals. Those are the bad people, and we shouldn't have to worry about that. And that was something that we heard a lot of from even advocates in the city, and definitely elected officials, and not being able to get anywhere to help people understand that immigration is a criminal justice issue. And that's really what we're also trying to amplify here, is to really, for all of us, to change our perspective and to realize that if we don't deal with these criminal justice issues that affect all people of color and poor people, that you're stuck with something like SB 4. But again, that's also the opportunity, because SB 4 shows us opportunities to actually look at our criminal justice system when we're talking about issues affecting the police and how they're policing our communities. We can actually now maybe look at the real root of these issues, and maybe for once have some real change. And so that's what we were trying to start with our 287G campaign. And the other thing that was really ruffled some feathers, but was a lot of fun, was to actually look at this. You know, our mayor loves to say Houston has been and always will be a welcoming city. And well, I don't know about that. I disagree, but it's definitely, the next line he says is we are the most diverse city in the country, which is the truth. And a lot of people don't understand that, but we are. And what's also beautiful about Houston is that we really appreciate that as a people, and we really do love each other, and we really do understand each other. And sometimes it's not in an intellectual way, for sure. I wouldn't say that, you know, people always can completely understand each other, but we eat together, we celebrate together, we work together, and I think that this is what makes us strong. And so people were coming together, and we were able to talk to the LGBTQ community and explain stories like Eddie Arias' story of a young gay man who was arrested coming from a gay bar around Halloween night, and was profiled because he has an accent and he didn't have a license. And because of a alleged DWI, spent over a month in the county jail, and then to be able to explain to the very powerful GLBT political caucus, who has gotten a lot of our most important elected officials into office, many of whom are in office right now, that when you're queer and you get sent to immigration, you can often wind up in solitary confinement. And that was appalling to people, and made people understand, wow, we should care about this issue. Immigration is something that affects the queer community. And maybe we should start asking about 287G and collaboration with ICE when we do our endorsement meetings and our screenings. And that's really powerful when you have communities that don't usually talk about certain issues, asking even elected officials in a screening committee about these issues. But then it was also us talking to the Black community and Black Lives Matter and other groups, and understanding what the issues were, and understanding the importance of changing our DA, who had issued a gang injunction just down the road from here, and essentially put 100 Black men on a list and decided that they were gang members without giving them notice, and completely curtailed their ability to live, work, travel in a certain area in Houston, or even if you wore a red shirt or you were in front of a certain Popeyes, would give a police officer cause to arrest you. And so these were issues that we all understood, right? Because the immigrant community understood we are the fear of the police and issues with policing, and so does the Black community. And so as just developing relationships and using our strength and our diversity is what made our campaign strong. And so ultimately being able to talk about these issues to where candidate Gonzalez for sheriff adopted 287G, the end of 287G, as a campaign issue. And us making sure that the community and making it one of the most important local election issues in Houston in November. And so similar to what happened, and I remember seeing the results in Arizona, and we had a similar effect here. The county went Democrat, and when the president went Republican, and that doesn't happen in Harris County, Texas. And that's huge. It's huge. We had a change in a DA, we had a change in a sheriff, and these are essential positions for criminal justice reform. So, going off of that and continuing to work in the legislature, and I mean, as Ghislaine mentioned, the legislature, it is a tough place, and the reality is that Greg Abbott was so prepared and started a anti-sanctuary city campaign over a year ago and started tweeting similar to what Trump does, and basically started saying we're not going to have sanctuary cities in Texas when we don't have sanctuary cities in Texas. And up until the election in Austin in November, Austin was honoring detainers, and in Texas we honor something like 97% of detainers. It's just, he created a false reality, and it's just what it is. And so even though there was a fight on the House floor, our Senate was a lot more difficult, but on the House floor there was a spirited debate, and a lot of our Houston representatives really fought hard and talked about these facts. And so what this really is about, attacking immigrants and people of color, but that's not all that, the people that were attacked this session. We did our best to show up to fight the SB 6, the anti-trans bathroom bill, and to uplift the issues of trans immigrants, and to explain how, issues that affect, again, the LGBTQ community affect the immigrant community. And it was just a really horrible, awful session. And SB 4 passed. And we knew there was a chance because it was SB 4, which meant it was a top priority for the governor. And it was painful. It really was painful. But I do agree that, I'm hopeful that we've hit rock bottom, that we're not going to go further down than this, because again, I believe in my core that this is not Texas, and I hope all of you that are coming from somewhere else, yes, this is a difficult situation, but this is not Texas. I remember when the Arizona bill passed, our governor at the time, Governor Perry, issued statements saying we wouldn't do that in Texas, and that's the truth. My state has been hijacked, and I'm really pissed off about it, and I'm not going to be quiet about it. And so what's happening is a shift. It's a shift where we've seen, even in this city, when we were talking about criminal justice issues and enforcement issues, and we have a lot more partners now after the election, and it's really exciting, and other groups that are willing to do advocacy in a way that we never saw before. And so that's exciting. But it's difficult because basically now we are having to push our local elected officials in a way that they didn't expect. And there was a certain type of politics in Texas. We're very polite down here. I mean, we're not, are we the South or the Southwest? So we're kind of like a mix of the two. And so we're not, especially when it comes to politics, because if you're a so-called progressive or Democrat in the state, it can be tough for you. And so a lot of our local elected officials, although the county went blue, we're used to this like backroom deal kind of situation. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. Don't ruffle any feathers. Don't make any statements. We'll call this a welcoming city, not sanctuary. No one will know the difference, right? And so that's how we like to play here in Texas. But the reality is that our community just can't continue that way. And Oscar can speak to that, but really it's just imperative now that our local elected officials stand strong, become true leaders, and really, really push. And what we need is policy. We don't need rhetoric. Yes, I know Houston's the most diverse city in the country, but we have developed policies, and we're happy to share. We've been working a lot with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, and we'll be sharing soon a lot of policies that we've shared at the local level, and workarounds for SB4, and there is a lot that our local officials can do. And yes, we need to sue to stop SB4, at least to stall it, but that is definitely not the end. That's only the beginning, and we will continue to build power in the immigrant community and work with allies so that we make sure that our people in office at the local level are true advocates for the immigrant community. So
Thanks, Francis. How's everyone doing? Yes, awesome. There you go. Give me a fist. So my name is Oscar. I'm undocumented. Been undocumented for over 27 years now. I'm a native. Been in Houston for about 20 years of my life. I'm a homeowner. I love this city. I love the people in my city. I can share with you that when I was a child growing up, I remember a day that my mother, she got me, my older brother, my younger sister. We used to live in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and the only reason people know Scranton is because of The Office, right? It's the only joke I got. I mean, we grew up there, and it really was nothing. We were one of the 4 families that spoke Spanish, and my parents were like one of a handful of people that didn't speak any English. I remember one day my mom, she took us, out of the apartment we lived in, and she took us to an alley right behind the apartments, and she lined us up like a row of ducks, and then she just started to say, if one day you see that your father and I are taking into a big white bus, she said, I want you to take this alley and I want you to walk to your grandmother's house. She told me, don't run, walk. And really when I heard my mother say that, the first thing that went through my mind was, I take the school bus every day, she's being dramatic, like what's going on, what is she talking about? And it's really because I didn't understand what the context she was referring to. I didn't understand borders, national security, undocumented immigrants, Mexico. I mean, my world was reduced to those 4 blocks in my elementary school. I was about 6 years old at the time. My brother was 7. My sister, she was about 5. And we didn't understand what the issue was. But growing up, that came up over and over and over again. And the reality, the context that put me in was that it didn't matter whether I was good or bad. If I participated in something, somebody in my family could disappear. And that's just the reality that a lot of our undocumented community, the trauma that we have to live through, and the cruel reality that that's where our state wants us to head towards, and until the mayor or the sheriff do anything, that's what they're complying with. And that's also specifically where the president wants us to head towards, to have a lot of undocumented immigrants with that fear. Now, this is like that trauma and the fear is something we never get over. It's something that we live with. And for people like me and other amazing activists that I've seen in California, Arizona, and all over the place, but especially all over Texas, to come out and still use the phrase undocumented and unafraid to talk about our status, to put ourselves at that risk, is because we care that much. And I think that if undocumented immigrants could do this, putting this much at risk, that there's no reason why a lot of our allies or anything can't support us as strongly as we need them to right now, as we need some of y'all to do it right now. And really, for us as United We Dream, putting the most affected people at the head of the line is intentional, because no one's going to fight for these issues more than we are. More when we're talking about undocumented immigrants, people of color, or women, LGBT community, and even people with different religious backgrounds, because our Muslim community is suffering a lot right now too. And our intention is to work together, as we've seen that the success that we've had in the past, as Francis mentioned around 287G, but furthermore, what we can build. Because I remember talking about sanctuary cities over a year ago, and people telling me that doesn't have a definition, that's not Houston, that why do we need it? But unfortunately, I think what happens to a lot of our families when we get someone deported, when we don't know the situation we're in, it had to happen to a lot of the people who support us. And then you get things like Senate Bill 4, and all of a sudden, well, maybe we do need sanctuary city. And I know that I guess the feeling that some people get, right, when you see that, when you're driving down the road and then you see that red and blue light behind you, I mean, that's the feeling a lot of our parents get when they go into a bus. And that's just and despite that, they still show up to protest. And despite that, they still call in their city council members, their mayors, they're still pushing the sheriffs. And despite all that, we do this because we care. We care about our community, we care about our allies, we care about our city. It's where we are. And we've been able to build traction here. We've been giving Know Your Rights sessions across the city, empowering community members, and then training our own community to come out and give these Know Your Rights sessions to their family, to their friends, to the people that live, their neighbors, where they are. That's the same approach we had when DACA came. We helped people apply for DACA, then we trained them on how to give DACA services, and then they helped other people apply. So that's the great intention of what we're trying to do within United We Dream. And we know that one of our biggest fights every time in a legislative session has been HB 1403, or the in-state tuition, keeping the Dreamer issues alive. So despite every horrible thing that happened in this legislation, there was no anti-in-state tuition bill passed. We won that again, so that was a huge victory that we need to recognize that the only reason there's money and undocumented immigrants can still go to college and have funds to go to college and have that protection is because the efforts and the things that we pushed forward to make sure that that happens. And I know that the mayor has asked us to wait in the past when we talked about the policies and the things that the mayor has the power to do without the city council. He asked us to wait. He wanted to see the policies. We introduced him with the policies. He asked us to wait till after the Super Bowl. We waited till after the Super Bowl. He asked us to wait and close the door on us, and then he said that SB 4 wouldn't pass, that it's not going to pass the state committee, that it's not going to get signed. It passes, it gets signed, that it wouldn't become a law. It's a law, and now he's asking us to wait till after September. So basically what he's saying is that let's see how many people get deported before we decide to act on something. And this is why, even though the mayor is a Democrat, and even though I think that's one of the approaches, right? That, we're not a Republican, so what's the big deal? That's not enough. That's not what we need. And maybe we are asking for some people to step up and to become a civil rights leader. Maybe that's it. But the reality is that that's exactly what we need right now. That's in the time and the situation we're in, and if he can't do it, then we need to find somebody who can. So what I hope that we can get out of these conversations is to realize that this battle and this fight is nothing new. It's something we've been in here before. It's something that our community has been suffering through since we've came to this country, but that we do have a legitimate chance because now more and more people are awake and want to get involved and feel that necessity because even though it took this long, which it is what it is, but you realize that, that our liberty is tied with yours. And I think that's extremely valuable. And because of that is why we do feel that we can make a huge change within the city and within the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. So we have about 5 to 6 minutes for questions, abbreviated a bit, so please line up if you have any questions. Identify yourself, please.
I don't have any experience with microphones. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. My name's Leah Easterby, and I'm a pro bono attorney. I'm a Houston resident. And I was wondering if Francis and Oscar, if you have any advice on how the locals can push the city council to join the lawsuit against SB 4.
So really quick, what I would say, despite Mayor Turner's tweet about pushing city council to get him to do it, he actually has the power to do it himself. He does not need city council to get him to do it, but at the same time, we do want people to push city council so people can know why this matters. So one of the things is they have public session every Tuesday. Coincidentally, they don't have one this coming Tuesday. And I think the mayor's out of the state the following Tuesday. But if you can go to public session, make your voices heard, that's extremely important. We're also making visits to city council members. So depending on which district you are, you can visit your city council member and the other 5 city council members at large that represent the entire city. One question I would just repeat to or ask all of you, what does the city council members do? And I think that's just to prove a point that city council member, much like the county commissioners, many of our residents have no idea what they do, and that's why they get away with doing whatever they want. So it's extremely important for us to know who our city council members are and how do we approach them. I also suggest you could text UWDH to 877-877. That's UWDH 877-877, and we'll text you information of when our next events are happening and how you can join us to our city council member visits.
But I think that the talk is at June 20th will be the next session, and that's when they will possibly vote. So please join us. And then you can also go to United We Dream Houston on Facebook, and we have updates. And I know we're going to be doing visits at City Council all throughout the week coming up.
Any more questions? Yes.
Everyone, I'm Bill Holston. Chris, I had a question for you. It's something you said that I'd like you to expand on, or the rest of you as well. And you said that full coordination is impossible, and we had to recognize diversity of tactics. So what do you mean by that? Because a lot of us are trying to organize, and we're trying to find common ground. So I understand that tension, but I'd just like to hear you talk a little more about it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said about it. Particularly, I think again, some of the funders who help support the pushback would like to see sort of complete coordination. There's a guy named Alfredo Gutierrez in Arizona who was the Senate, and he almost was governor. Actually, the world would have been different had he won. And he used to talk about how even though the people that were walking around door knocking with clipboards, with a theory of change that if we only get out the vote in the next election, that will turn things around in Arizona. They were doing their work and having meetings over here, and the activists who are engaging in what I think is really necessary in Arizona, the sort of we will not comply, creating a level of civil disobedience, first obviously to get cities to oppose, but then eventually to get declarations to say we are not going to comply with the law. They were not coordinating at all. In fact, they were often speaking derisively about each other. The activists were saying, hey, the get out the vote people, that's pretty shabby stuff, whatever we need to be doing, and vice versa. But what Alfredo used to say, which was very, very important, and a lesson from Arizona, was that people would open the doors for the door knocking and entertain the GOTV effort precisely because the night before they saw the work of the activists, the courageous work, shutting down raids done by Arpaio. And so it was sort of uncoordinated coordination, if you will, and there was, I would even say, a degree of antipathy between some of the different theories of change, between the get out the vote effort, the activists, and then I think that you had a third group of people, which are, were the lawyers who wanted to sort of silence, to a certain degree. There's not going to be clean coordination. And I would also submit, there's now an organization in Phoenix, Arizona called Puente, which didn't exist. It was actually formed in response to fighting SB 1070. It is the flagship immigrant rights organization in the state of Arizona, and I would actually say nationally as well, in terms of leading the way. There's a beautiful New York Times feature piece about their work a couple weeks ago in the New York Times Magazine. That organization didn't really exist in a real institutional way in 2010. It now is, again, I think, a very, very important organization. I think it's going to be very important to look around and there are going to be people that will surprise you. It might be, everyone's going to have different roles. Bigger institutions will be able to do certain things. There might be constellations of 5 or 10 people. It might be a church. It might be a student group or whatever that might act as a spark plug as well. So I also think that you have to resist as well the tendency to think of the status quo sort of landscape or ecosystem of organizations as itself intractable or immutable, because I think and I hope that new institutions, new forms of activism will emerge, and dare I say again, less institutional in their approach.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit to that, I think it's also important to know that different organizations have different strategies, and sometimes respecting strategies that aren't yours. It's okay if you're going through the same goal, but I would also add that the importance of having people affected being in those strategy conversations is extremely important, because you won't have you can't make the change for another community. Okay, you can coming from a complete outsider perspective to say this is what they need is it's not just an outsider approach. It's not just like irrelevant. It could be very condescending, and at the same time, it might not be what the community needs at all. So, and then it becomes the frustration that we made a change. Why aren't they grateful? Because they were never included in that space, and because that change that was made was something that they didn't feel.
I would just say, just relating to faith-based participation, recognizing not only your own faith, but interfaith and ecumenical, and also recognizing, and this I can say as part of the Catholic Church, the more conservative elements within your own faith, and coming at it at a, where do we have things in common? Where can we build on things, and how can we kind of engage in a way that moves things forward while others maybe are taking other positions, because that is part of this movement, right? Acknowledging those people who maybe don't hold these views with you, but you have commonalities, and pushing them too, because we really do need to do work on hearts of minds outside of this type of environment to those who are making some of the legislative decisions in Texas and nationally.
We have one last question.
Hi there. I had a question for Ashley. You had mentioned that you're working on coordinating cross-sector partnerships, and in the slide there was a point about ICE, meeting with ICE agents. I feel like we've painted ICE as a very devilish organization, which, I mean, but I don't know. I mean, we also talk about cross-sector partnerships and the value add of getting everybody on the same page. How did those meetings go? Do you feel like there is opportunity to work with rather than fight against?
Sure. So, I mean, we talked here a lot, and you have experts at the state level and local level talking about how we've seen a lot of local, all politics are local now, right? So we have, right now, the ICE leadership is an acting, Tom Home is the acting. People think that he will become the new deputy, the director of ICE, but we don't know. We also, some of the appointments within the Department of Homeland Security have come from, certain organizations that don't hold views of some of the people here. And I would say there are 27 field offices representing different parts of, every community here. And I think it's really vital, in addition to some of the activities here relating to resistance, engagement, to have other entities come and engage as well as much as possible to say, this is a community issue for us, we need to engage with you as well. It's just one piece, what I will say about that, but we've had bishops, archbishops, most notably the Archbishop of Los Angeles, Jose Gomez, has gone and spoken with ICE and has had some of his priests speak with ICE and had some pretty interesting conversations where this is a sector that is voicing their concern about what's going on enforcement-wise. And I think it's a piece of what needs to occur. Is it the only solution? No. But to make some of these individual officers at the field office level see that personal connection and feel kind of that attention, I think is part of the dialogue here. And it certainly is reflecting some of the trends that we are seeing as it relates to state and local and community engagement. Will it yield fruit in every instance? No. But is it important to try, at least from an institutional perspective here? Yes, particularly in concert with some of the actions that are going on here. I think this administration and state and local entities who are working on immigration enforcement particularly, they need to feel every point of pressure possible. And this type of engagement is one of them.
I would just add on to that quickly by saying, and at risk of saying something slightly out of character for those of you who know me, something positive about the final years of the Obama administration. One of the things that Secretary Johnson did that was good at ICE was he brought a sort of chain of command culture to what is a rogue law enforcement agency. And so there started to be some degree of sort of expectation that these local directors would follow priorities that were coming from DC. That's been lifted, and now you have these field directors that are essentially like kings of fiefdoms with no control. It really is a rogue law enforcement agency. I really do think, honestly, that generations are gonna look back at our generation and say, what the heck were we all doing as this federal police force sort of was defining its own mission, running rampant, terrorizing communities, transmuting, local criminal law enforcement, and we weren't doing anything about it. But where things are now is that all of these field what we're seeing in sort of individual organizing against deportation context is that the field directors hold all the cards. And we have not yet figured out a way, whether it's to create a sort of moral compulsion or shame. End on, we are continuing to try to delegitimize the institution wholesale. And so there's campaigns all across the country to basically delegitimize ICE, to get ICE, to kick ICE the hell out of our communities, because we do believe that it is a rogue and treacherous law enforcement agency that is defining its own mission in ways that are extremely deleterious. Now, again, to this question of, I don't think we should expect necessarily, bishops or cardinals to have a similar thing, and maybe there's different, but, we will be on the outside saying we would like ICE out of all sort of local spaces, but I think that's very complementary to what was just said in terms of trying to find points of pressure with these different field directors.
We have to stop there, but thank you to the panelists. Thank you.